أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
JazaakAllah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has allowed us to continue and come back inshallah for the third week for this fiqh halaqah. Last week we discussed those actions which are sunnat in the wudu. So any brothers that were present last week, if they can remind us how many acts we discussed last week which were sunnat in the wudu. If anybody can remember, there's a certain number that we did.
13.
13, yes. There were 13 acts of wudu that we did which were sunnat. Today we will discuss that in the practical wudu. Today we'll be discussing the mustahabb, those acts which are mustahabb in wudu, or you could say the etiquettes of wudu. And 2 weeks ago we also discussed the differences, the definitions of these terms. We mentioned that mustahabb is something which is different from sunnat. Mustahabb is something where you get reward for doing it, but if you don't do it, you won't receive a sin for it. You're not going to be considered blameworthy for leaving out that certain act. And we discussed that sunnat was something which you get reward for doing it, but now leaving it out without any proper excuse, a person is considered to be blameworthy for that act. So mustahab is of a lower level than sunnah. So today we'll be discussing those acts which are mustahab in wudu, and then afterwards we'll be show the practical method of how to perform wudu. So we'll start inshallah. The first act, which is mustahab in wudu, is to sit on an elevated area. The way we have in the wudu khanas in the masajid, where there's an elevated area. And many of us are used to doing wudu in the bathroom, so we're not really used to doing wudu while sitting down on an elevated area, so sometimes you might find it to be difficult. But that is actually a mustahab act in wudu, right? It's one of the etiquettes of wudu, that you sit on an elevated area while performing wudu. One of the wisdoms is, we discussed last week as well, ma'un musta'mal, water that is used for performing wudu. When you're washing your face in the water that drops off from your face. So when you're sitting in an elevated area, it's to make sure that those drops of water don't land, for example, on your other limbs as well. So this is one of the wisdoms of sitting on an elevated area. The second is to make sure you face the qibla when performing wudu, right? This is also a mustahab act. Person will get rewarded for doing it. If he doesn't face the qibla, that doesn't mean that now he's receiving sin or his wudu is not valid. So that's the second one. The third, these acts are quite simple. There's no need for that explanation, many of them. So we'll just breeze right through some of these. The third is to perform wudu by oneself, right, without taking help from somebody else. This is when a person doesn't have an excuse. So if a person is sick, for example, due to old age or some type of injury that he has, he needs to take help from somebody else, then he's allowed. But now if a person does not have any valid excuse, doesn't have an injury, it's not, he's perfectly fine, and then it is mustahab for him to perform wudu by himself without taking any help. So to perform wudu by oneself. The fourth, this is also important, is that when we are performing the wudu, one shouldn't speak, right? When you're performing wudu, and sometimes you'll have somebody who's next to you that's also performing wudu. So now in the middle of wudu, you start talking to them. You see the highlights of last night's game. Randomly you start talking about the dunya matters. So one of the mustahab acts of wudu is that when you're performing wudu, you shouldn't speak, right? And we'll discuss later on, their du'as, they're not included in this. You read the du'as. There are certain du'as which are narrated in the hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would recite them in the middle of wudu, and then after wudu, there was also another du'a to read. So the du'as are excluded from this, right? Which brings me to the next point, is to read those du'as which are narrated in the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We discussed that in the beginning of wudu, when you start, the first is the intention, and then afterwards you say Bismillah. There's also a du'a you read in the middle of wudu. The du'a is Allahumma ighfir li dhanbi wa wassi' li fi dari wa barik li fi rizqi. This is the dua. We could find it online, or there might be a PDF of a book. One book that I recommend you get is titled Masnoon Du'as. It's a very comprehensive book. It has du'as of almost everything. You name it, they have a du'a for it. For waking up, for going to sleep, for leaving the house, entering the house, leaving the bathroom, entering the bathroom, walking towards Fajr, waking up for tahajjud salat, the du'a for the morning, du'a for the evening, du'a, and they also have in there the du'as that you read in the wudu. So you can find these online as well. Basic du'as, right? The one that I just read, you read this du'a in the middle of wudu, and then afterwards there's another du'a that you read after finishing wudu. Sixth point is mentioning the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're washing each limb. And we mentioned last week that since many of us, if we perform wudu at home, then majority of the time we perform it in the bathroom. So when we're in the bathroom, then we don't do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like one of the sunnah acts of wudu is you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim when you're starting your wudu. So if you're performing wudu in the bathroom, you don't say it audibly, right? You don't say it in the bathroom. You could just say it in your heart. So similarly, when you're washing each limb, one mustahabb act is to say the name of Allah. So you're washing your face and you say Bismillah. When you're washing your right arm, you say Bismillah. Your left arm, you say Bismillah. Similarly, the right foot and the left foot. So if you're in the bathroom, then you say it in your heart. You don't say it out loud, audibly. So mentioning the name of Allah when washing each limb. Point after that is, yes, we mentioned last week one of the sunnah of wudu was to gargle water, right? When you gargle, we mentioned it, and one of the mustahab acts is that when you're gargling the water, when you're taking that scoop of water, you take it with your right hand for gargling water and for putting water in your nose in the nasal passage. So for both of those, you use your right hand to do it. And we mentioned how many times is sunnat to gargle water?
3.
Yes, 3 times. And similarly, when you're entering water into the nose, you take a scoop of water, doing it 3 times is also sunnat. And you do it separately. So first, you gargle water 3 times. For each one, you take a new scoop of water. And then afterwards, when you're putting water in your nose, you take a scoop of water for each one. So doing this with the right hand, it is mustahab.
You don't clean the nose with the left hand?
We're going to mention that afterwards. Right after this point is when you put water in your nose with your right hand, and then when you're blowing your nose, you put your left hand on your nose and you blow the water out. So again, to use the right hand when gargling water. And the 8th point is to use the left hand when you're blowing the water out of the nose. These are the 8 points. 9, this is another act which is mustahab, is if you're not in a state of wudu, then it's mustahab that before the timing for the next salat comes in, you make wudu. You are in a state of wudu before the timing for the next salat comes in. That is also something which is mustahab. So that was number 9. Number 10 is not to do israf, right? Not to waste water when you're making wudu. Now, as I mentioned, back then they had containers at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had containers and they used those containers to make wudu. Now we have sinks. So there's even israf when you're using that water. Even it's mentioned in a hadith where a sahabi asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that what if we're making water in a river, right? Is that still considered israf? If we take too much time or we use a lot of water, it's in the river, it's an abundant amount of water. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, yes, there's still israf in that as well. And some commentators underneath this hadith, they mentioned, Even though it might not be israf of water, there's israf in your wasting time, right? For no reason you're taking extra time in making your wudu. So number 10th point would be not to waste water. Another important point is to make masah of the back of the neck, right? This is something which is mustahabb, right? It's not a sunnat of wudu. Making masah of the back of the neck, which is also called the nape. Okay, and these are the last two which we will mention, and then we'll get into the practical method of performing wudu. Number 12. Yes, there is a dua that is read after finishing your wudu. Right, this is mustahabb. What is the dua? It's simple. It's just like when you read the shahada in tashahhud, but there's a slight variation to it. So dua in tashahhud, which dua, what do we read when we're raising the finger, right? We say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. So the dua one reads upon finishing wudu is similar, but there's a slight variation. So you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and then you add wahdahu la sharika lahu. These two parts you add to the dua. This is upon completing your wudu. So again, I'll repeat it. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu. These two parts you add. And then you continue. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. This is the dua that one reads upon finishing the wudu. And the last point which we will mention, one of the etiquettes of wudu is to perform 2 rakats after finishing wudu. It comes in a hadith, famous hadith, you've probably heard of it, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he went to Bilal radiallahu anhu and he informed him that I had a dream and I heard your footsteps in Jannat. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked him, is there a certain amal that you do? Is there a certain act that you do? So Bilal radiallahu anhu responded to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He's told him something which he does consistently. He says, after I perform wudu, he says, I pray 2 rakat salat after I perform my wudu. So even though this is something which we may look at as insignificant compared to other deeds, but it was through this deed which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saw in his dream and he heard the footsteps of Bilal radiallahu anhu in Jannah after finishing the wudu. This will conclude those acts which are mustahab in the wudu. So now we will go over the practical wudu, and in the practical wudu we'll discuss what was mentioned last week as well, those actions which are sunnat in the wudu. So for the sunnah of wudu, we mentioned the first thing was what? When you're starting your wudu?
The niyyah.
The niyyah, the intention, right? And one thing, intention, we have to understand that it's not necessary for you to verbally make the intention. In salat, intention is fard, is necessary, but verbally making the intention for salat is not necessary. You know, a lot of us growing up, this is what we used to hear, that when you're praying your salat, before you start your salat, you have to verbally make the intention that I'm standing in front of the Kaaba praying 4 rakat, fard for Zuhr salat. And sometimes you could hear people audibly saying this when they're praying their salat. It's not necessary for you to verbally make the intention. You could just make the intention in your heart, I'm praying 4 rakat, fard for Zuhr salat. And you start and you say the takbir, Allahu Akbar. So similarly for wudu, when you're making intention, it's not necessary for you to verbally make the intention. You can make the intention in your heart that I'm starting the wudu right now. Second, after the intention, what did we mention?
Bismillah.
Yeah, saying Bismillah. And also I mentioned earlier, in the bathroom, you say it in your heart, but if you're in a designated area for wudu, like for example, it's downstairs the wudu khana, then you could say Bismillah. After Bismillah, we mentioned, you wash your hands up until the wrists, right? So you wash your hands up until the wrist, you start with the right hand, right? This is also etiquette that you start with the right hand. So when you're washing your hands up to your wrist, you start with the right hand, and then you wash the left hand up until the wrist. You do this how many times?
3 times.
3 times, right? You wash the hands up until the wrist. Then afterwards, if you have a miswak, it's a sunnat of wudu that you use the miswak, right? And I mentioned the method which was mentioned of how to use the miswak. for the teeth, you rub it horizontally, right, from right to left. And then when you're doing miswak of your tongue, you do it vertically up and down. Now, if you don't have a miswak, then you can use your finger, right? I mentioned you can use your index finger as a substitute for the miswak, right? You use your index finger the way that you would use a miswak. So we covered these points. So after that is you gargle water. So I mentioned, right, Mustahabb is what? You take the scoop with the right hand. You take the scoop with the right hand, you put water in your mouth, you gargle water, you spit it out, and you do this 3 times, right? Just take a little bit of water, put it in your mouth, gargle it, and spit it out 3 times. Afterwards, after gargling the water, you take a scoop of water, you put it in your nose, and then you blow it out using your left hand. And this is done how many times? This is also done 3 times. So afterwards, now we come to washing the face, the part of washing the face. So you put both hands under the faucet, you gather up water in your hands, and you put water on your face, and make sure you rub the water on your face as well. And also, this is also important, this part between the sideburn and the earlobe is part of the face. You have to wash that part. It's necessary, this is part of the face. So when you're making wudu, you wash that part, and you make sure you rub the water on your face. In regards to the beard, we discussed this, so I'll just repeat it. If your beard is hanging from your face, then it's not necessary for you to wash your beard. But if it's not hanging from your face, or if you have a few strands of hair on your beard, then you have to wash it. Right? In that scenario, we mentioned what was the portion of the face that has to be washed from the hairline. If one doesn't have a beard, only has a few strands, then it's until the bottom of the chin. If he has a beard, then wherever the skin appears, until that portion. Right? And for the beard, we mentioned you do Mustahabb. So after washing the face 3 times, then afterwards we get to the arms, right? Just to make it easier for us. So when we are making wudu, an easier way, this also will help us use less water, is that we gather water in our hands and then just tilt up the hand a little bit and rub the water on our right arms, right? And including the elbows as well. This is important. When you're making wudu, you include the elbows as well. So you do this 3 times. You gather water and then you tilt up your right hand a little bit and then rub the water over your right arm 3 times. Similarly is the case with the left arm, right? You rub water 3 times up until the elbow. You wash the arms. So after finishing this, after this step is the step of doing masah, right? And we mentioned masah of the entire head, right? The masah of the entire head is sunnat. And last week we also mentioned a specific method, which was narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha of how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do masah. So I'll mention it again. He would take his 3 fingers, the middle finger, the ring finger, and the pinky. They would be joined together. The index finger and the thumb would be separate. So with these 3 fingers, he would do masah of the top of his head all the way until the back. And with the palms of his hands, he would do masah of the side of the head. He would come back to the front. Then with the index finger, he would do masah of the inside of the ear. And with the thumb, he would do masah of the outside of the ear. You could do either one of these. If you just choose to do masah of the entire head like this, then you will have fulfilled the sunnah. So either way you could do it. There's no problem with that. So after doing masah, and you do masah of the ears as well, you mentioned the mustahabb is also doing masah of the back of the neck. Now comes the khilal of the beard. We mentioned the sunnah is to what? Do khilal of the beard from underneath. If you do khilal of the beard, you could do it in this manner, or you could do it like this, as long as it's from underneath the beard, right? This is the sunnah, this is what is mentioned in the books of fiqh, the method of doing khilal of the beard. So now after one does khilal of the beard, now you do khilal of the fingers, as I mentioned, right? This is the gaps in between the fingers. You take your right hand, and like this, you just pass it over the gaps of the left hand, and then the left hand, you pass it over the gaps of the fingers of the right hand. So this is the khilal of the fingers. So now after this, it comes to washing the feet. And we mentioned you wash the feet up until the ankles, and also you rub it. Make sure you rub the water all over. This is also an etiquette of wudu, that you rub the water over it to make sure that each part is covered, right? So you do this 3 times on your right foot up until the ankle, including the ankle, the protruding bone. It's including that part. Similarly, you do it with the left foot 3 times. You take a little bit of water, you pour it on it, and you rub it over the foot so the water can reach each and every single portion.
Should the feet be washed with the left hand?
You could wash it with either hand. Yes, you can wash it with the left hand as well. Just when you start with the right foot, that's one of the etiquettes, right? Is that the limbs, you start with the right limb first, right? Like the right hand first, the right arm first, the right foot first, right? This is the etiquette of wudu. The scholars have also mentioned in the books of fiqh a method which can help us concentrate on our wudu, because we need to understand that wudu is something it's not a routine. A lot of us, we treat wudu like it's some type of routine, but in actuality, wudu is actually an ibadah, that is an act of worship, and you get reward when you're performing your wudu, and you're adhering, and you make sure that you fulfill all of the sunnah acts of wudu. So the scholars mention that there are certain du'as that we can recite when performing wudu, when we are washing certain limbs. So this actually does help you concentrate when you're in your salat, when you're making these du'as. So they mentioned that once you put water in your mouth and you're gargling water, the du'as are mentioned in Arabic, but just to make it easier for us, we can make these du'as in our hearts in English. So when you put water in your mouth and you're gargling water, you make du'a that, oh Allah, allow me to recite more Quran, allow me to be more grateful. And then when you're putting water in your nose in the nasal passages, you make du'a to Allah, that give me the ability to smell the fragrance of Jannat and don't let me smell the stench of Jahannam. Then afterwards, when you're washing your face, you make the dua that, oh Allah, make me from amongst those people whose faces are shining on the day of Qiyamah. Then when you're washing your arms, when you're washing your right arm, you make dua to Allah that, oh Allah, give me my book of deeds in my right hand. When you're washing the left hand, you make dua that, oh Allah, don't give me my book of deeds in my left hand. When you're doing masa of the head, then you make this dua. All these duas you can make in your heart. Right? When you're making masa of your head, say, oh Allah, shade me underneath the shade of your throne on the day of Qiyamah. And when you're making masa of your ears, make dua to Allah that, oh Allah, allow me to take heed of the advices that I hear. When you're washing your right foot, you can make the dua that, oh Allah, make my feet firm when I'm crossing the bridge of Sirat. Right? And when you're washing the left foot, you make dua to Allah that, oh Allah, don't let me slip when I'm crossing the bridge of Sirat. So these are certain du'as that we can make to help us concentrate on our wudu. Right? So these were the Mustahabb acts, and we just went over the practical methods of performing wudu. Next week, inshallah, we will cover those things which break one's wudu. Right? There are a few of those. So we will discuss that next week, inshallah. So if any brothers have any questions right now, they can ask. Yes.
So the winter season is coming, and people like apply a lot of lotion. Affect the way water gets handled.
Lotion is easily washed off. So when you're performing wudu, the lotion washes off. As long as it reaches the skin, that's fine. It's not making a barrier in between your skin. Like for example, if you have paint on your skin, then that is actually a barrier. If there's paint and you're making wudu, and that small smudge of paint didn't come off, and that part hasn't been washed, you have to make sure that part is washed. So if it creates a barrier, then in that scenario, that part will not be considered to have been washed.
Lotions are mostly moisturized, so
Yeah. You can easily be washed off through making wudu. Any other questions any brothers have? Yes.
So for number 12, the dua after finishing, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, do you also raise the shahada finger with that?
Yes, it is mentioned that you raise your shahada finger, and also I forgot to mention that you face the qibla, right, when doing this dua, when reading this dua. After finishing wudu, you face the qibla and you read this dua. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh.
You don't look up, right? You just look to qibla.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions?
this thing that make a wudu before the time for the next salat. What does that exactly mean?
So if
it's between Zohar and Asr.
Yeah, so for example, Zuhr Salat, and there's, for example, a few minutes left until Asr Salat, what will be Mustahabb is that you perform wudu and make sure you have wudu before the timing for the next Salat comes in. Yes.
I wasn't here last week, so I don't know if you covered the steps of wudu. If, let's say, by accident or even on purpose, you do it.
You don't follow the order? Yes, we mentioned last week that according to the Hanafi madhab, following the tartib and the wudu, which is what, washing the face first, and then the arms, and then the feet. According to the Hanafi madhab, it is sunnat. According to the Shafi'i madhab, it's fard. So, according to the Shafi'i madhab, you can't wash your feet first, and then wash your face, and then wash your arms. Your wudu will not count in that scenario, because doing it in order is fard. But according to the Hanafi madhab, it is sunnat, right? So if a person washes his feet first, and then washes his face, then that's completely fine, right? Any other questions?
If during wudu somebody say Assalamu alaikum, can we respond or not?
Yes, you can respond to the salam, yes. I mentioned, right, the certain azkar that you say in your wudu, those are they're excluded from these. Any brothers have any other questions? Yes.
For number 10, not to do israf, don't use too much water or time. Is there like an objective amount? Like how much water should we use? Like milliliter, like a quantity?
Yeah, the books mention a certain amount. You can't really estimate it when we're making wudu from the sink, So the main thing is try not to use too much. For now, you have the water pressure up until the highest level. And similarly also, there are also certain makruh acts in wudu. One makruh act is to be completely stingy with the water. Where now you just turn around a little bit and just like one drop at a time is coming out and you're making wudu through that. So just a moderate amount. You see, if you lift up the water pressure, if it's just at a medium level, where not too much is coming out, but just like a medium amount, where now it's possible for you to make wudu and it won't waste too much time, then that amount you should follow. It won't fall under israf. Yes.
I mean, there might be no answer for it, but where did like the habits of like splashing water everywhere, making noises?
Yeah, that's also that in part of the makruh acts of wudu. We'll also cover that next week as well, along with those acts which break the wudu. When you're performing wudu, is that when you are washing your limbs, make sure you wash them gently. Right? One of the things is that splashing water in your face or smacking the water on your face, that's a makruh act of wudu, right? So that'll be discussed next week as well.
So I don't know if it's going to be discussed next week, but a person is performing wudu, let's say he gets to the part where he's washing or she's washing their face, but now for some reason or whatever their wudu breaks, they pass one or something. Now would they have to start from the very beginning, or would
Yes.
they continue?
Yes, start from the beginning. If you break your wudu in the middle, then you'll start from the beginning again.
Can I make niyyah again also?
Yeah, you follow the sunnah steps of wudu.
Also, in terms of the khilal, is it of the hands? Is it the right hand over the left first, or is it the left?
So you start with the right hand, as I mentioned. So for this, you do the left hand over the right hand. Yes. And again, that is something which is mustahabb.
For
Yes.
11, you make masa on the back of the neck, right? It's
Yes.
mustahabb.
Yes, the back of the neck, not over here.
Okay.
This part of the neck.
This is nothing, right?
Yeah, the fiqh book
It's
mentioned
not
that
even
actually doing of the throat area, that's actually a bid'ah.
It's a bid'ah.
Yes.
Okay, it's not even mustahab. Okay.
No. The back of the neck is mentioned as mustahab.
If you forget, you do the wudu and you dry up and then you remember that you forget something. If one foot, washing your feet or something.
Yes, you can go and just wash that one
Yes,
part.
yes,
Last
one
week it
part.
was discussed that it's not farad according to the Hanafi madhab.
I was not-
To do wash one limb after the other, make sure the previous limb doesn't dry. So for example, if you wash your face and then you start brushing your teeth and your face dries, you don't have to wash your face again. You could wash your arms and your feet and the wudu will be valid. Yes.
Just because I missed that, how do you snort the water when you try and clean?
You just gently put it in your nose. And there's also mentioned that if you're not fasting, then you snort the water up until the soft part of the nose. You see where the bone starts? Up until there. That's when you do it. Yes.
So you don't have to sniff it, like you just put it just like that? Or
Yes, you can gently put it in your nose. If you're not fasting, then yes, you could sniff the water. Yes, you're encouraged to do that. Any other questions? Yes.
While wuduing,
Mhm.
my hand cannot reach my feet.
Yes.
Just I just open the sink and wash it. I cannot. My hand cannot reach my feet. So that way.
That's fine. There can be other means where you can wash your feet. If you can, for example, pick up your foot and place it in the sink. Then you could use, for example, put water in the lota, then wash your feet using that. Or in the tub, you could wash your feet. There's no problem with doing that.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to rub the foot. You can just submerge it in water.
Yes, yes. Remember we mentioned rubbing is actually encouraged, right? This is sunnah. Yes.
Yeah, when somebody is doing wudu and like when they're snorting water, I've seen people like they do like the mouth and the nose kind of at the same time. Is that like okay?
According to the Hanafi madhab, you do it separately. We mentioned it last week that you take a scoop of water, and for each time you're gargling water, you take a new scoop of water. So you take one scoop of water, and then the second one, and the third one. You first gargle water in the mouth, then afterwards you put it in the nose. Right? According to other madhab, there's a difference.
Okay.
There is a
Yes.
use the word mustahabb, right? Water.
I'm sorry?
It's called you use water, right? Use water. In the bathtub,
yes.
in the bathtub.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes there is stoppage of the water, so we have to wait it until like because the water has been used.
Yes.
And the water is going down slowly.
Yes.
So we have to wait until the water goes down or just.
I mean, it's fine. So, for example, like if you're taking a shower and then there's water that you use that fell off from your body and it's falling into the tub, and then in the process, the water is flowing and is going down the drain. So it's not necessary that you have to necessarily wait for the water.
What you're saying, like if it's standing?
Yeah.
For the purpose of
if-
washing your foot?
If it's just standing and it's not going down the drain,
Yeah.
It gets back
then yes.
Yeah.
Then you wait for that to go down the drain and then
It's like-
you use the water.
Or you can come out of the shower and then wash your feet in the
Yes.
end, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both of those options are there.
You
Yes.
know when you get mucus that comes out, but
Mhm.
it's like sometimes there's blood in there, but it's dried, like a dried booger. Like, does that break your wudu?
It's dry blood, meaning?
Yeah, it's not flowing. It's a part of the mucus, and it's
Okay.
like hard and dry.
No, that won't break your wudu.
Okay.
Any other questions, brother?
Sometimes you do the maswak and some blood comes. It's not the blood. And you goggle throughout, so it's like reddish, pinkish. Still
Just from the miswak?
with the maswak and all that.
We'll cover that next week. It falls under the category of whether or not the blood is flowing. There's a little explanation to that, so we'll cover it next week. Yes.
Yeah. If people have gel on their hair, so like with masa, will it still be valid or not?
No. You have to make sure that the gel is washed off before performing the masa.
Sorry, you have to take off your gel.
Any other questions with this?
Is it like any hair supplement? I don't use gel. I use like a different kind of material.
Like I mentioned, if it doesn't create like a type of barrier in between, if some of the supplements that are used, like lotions for example, so if a person uses olive oil for example, and then he does masa over there, then that's fine. If it's something which is very thin and it's not really creating that type of barrier, a gel is something which holds your hair and it's actually thick, so it creates that barrier in between that hair. So
Gel,
you have to wash it off.
gel, pomade, all that stuff. They create a
thin,
water barrier.
And if it's thin, then it's fine.
Wait, but is the point of the masa for your hair or for your scalp? Like,
it's for your hair. Right? If a person doesn't have it, then of course you still, you do masa.
Just simply wipe it.
Yes, just wiping it. It's not necessary to wash.
If a brother is bald, same thing, right? Just
Yeah,
masa.
same thing, just masa, yes. Any other questions, or can we end off, inshallah? And inshallah, we can know. JazaakAllah khair, brothers, for taking out your time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to implement these in our lives and act upon them.
Ameen.
SubhanAllah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdihi, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaykum assalam.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين وإن كنتم جنبا فاطهروا وإن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط أو لامستم النساء فلم تجدوا ماء فتيمموا صعيدا طيبا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم منه ما يريد الله ليجعل عليكم من حرج ولكن يريد ليطهركم وليتم نعمته عليكم لعلكم تشكرون